أجمعين سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم افتح علينا أكرم الأكرمين. So alhamdulillah, we continue inshallah ta'ala what we have studied with Imam Al-Ghazali from the beginning of guidance. We covered so far in the previous wasallam his lifestyle when it comes to food and eating and so on and so forth. And you would find also Imam Yusuf al-Nabhani, who was been known as the Busiri of the late generations. And he's a teacher of our teachers, and also you could say a teacher of our teachers. He authored a book on Shama'il, and when he speaks about the foods of the Prophet ﷺ, like the Prophet's preferences of food, he started the chapter by quoting Imam Qastallani, in which he said the first bid'ah that appeared in Islam was satiety, feeling full. That was the first bid'ah that appeared amongst Muslims, that they would have of fullness. So according to Imam Qastallani, and this is something it seemed since Imam Yusuf Nabhani quoted him, it is something that has been considered as important, like as a matter of emphasis. This was the first bid'ah that appeared in Islam, and this one could also derive the seriousness of this from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, in which he said, "Lal faqr akhsha alaykum." I'm not fearful, I'm not afraid that you would be affected, meaning in your deen, by poverty. Lal faqr akhsha alaykum. I'm not fearful that poverty will affect your religiosity. ولكن أخشى عليكم أخاف عليكم الدنيا. I'm afraid of the effect of the dunya upon you. Meaning that if it becomes available, he says تكالبتم عليها, like you would indulge in the dunya as wolves that would attack its prey, or as hyenas that would attack a prey, and sometimes they would fight with each other over the prey, or over a corpse. So this is the what we need to highlight here in terms of the sense of fullness. Now, and I believe I mentioned this before, maybe some of you heard it, maybe some did not. Imam Al-Ghazali spoke in Ihya Ulumuddin about the how do we tell if we're hungry or not. Because when we say the Prophet ﷺ would not eat until he's hungry, or the companions would not eat until they're hungry, how one knows that they're hungry or not hungry? Now you might say, you just know. You find yourself at 2 a.m. walking to the fridge, and there's a magnetic pull that takes you there, even if your eyes are closed, but you just kind of flow in the house until you reach the fridge. Right? Or you just find yourself just driving without knowing where you're going, but your spirit knows that you're going to Mikasa, to Sunshine Kebabs. There is a magnetic pull that just takes you there. Sorry. How do we know if this is an actual hunger, if it's a real hunger or a figurative hunger? So Imam Al-Ghazali says, if you're thinking about condiments, in modern day, if you're thinking about sauces or how it's cooked, he says, then you're not hungry. This is a crave. If you're really hungry, you would not think about the kind of food, nor how it's cooked, how it's spiced. You just, whatever you find, you would eat. But if you still have this sense of being picky, not this one, I don't like it this way, then you're not in real hunger. Your lower self is tricking you, making you feel that you're hungry, but you're actually craving. Real hunger is like when when you're starving and someone tells you, wait until we heat it. No, 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 I'll just eat it like that. This is actual hunger. But if you're still picking and choosing which part of the chicken, which part of the beef, is it a sirloin? Is it a ribeye? Is it ribs? I said the word. Is it, which sauce? Is it barbecue? Is it this? Is it that? This is craving. It's not a real hunger. Allah. طيب. So Imam Al-Ghazali here, he says it hardens the heart, corrupts the intellect, weakens. He lists a number of ramifications, and all of these ramifications, they are related to what? Related to food that is halal. So you can derive by analogy, what if the food is haram? If the food that is halal and we're just having too much of it, it results in all of this. What would the haram food result in? The Prophet ﷺ, Imam Tirmidhi narrates in Shama'il al-Muhammadiyya, that the Prophet ﷺ, he went to a garden. I think he went with Sayyidina Abu Bakr and Sayyidina Umar, if I recall correctly. And the Prophet ﷺ, he went to, with Sayyidina Abu Bakr and Sayyidina Umar. And they went to, I believe, a companion named Abu Talha. And they went to his garden. Actually, the Prophet ﷺ came out of his room and found Sayyidina Abu Bakr coming. He asked Sayyidina Abu Bakr, why did you come at this hour? Sayyidina Abu Bakr said, I came to gaze at the face of the Prophet ﷺ. And then Sayyidina Umar came, and the Prophet ﷺ asked Sayyidina Umar, why are you coming? He said, well, I'm starving. So the Prophet ﷺ, he says, I am also a bit hungry. And then they went to the garden of Abu Talha. They did not find him. They found his wife and they asked, where is your husband? She said that he was getting some ajwa or some date. He's picking some dates from the palm trees and some fresh water. So when he came, he found the Prophet ﷺ. He offered from the dates and he offered from the water. And then he offered that he would slaughter a goat or something of that sort for the Prophet ﷺ. There was a moment where the Prophet ﷺ, when he offered them the dates and the water, where the Prophet ﷺ, he said, this is from the blessings, from the bliss that we would be asked about on the day of judgment. ثُمَّ لَتُسْأَلُنَّ يَوْمَئِذٍ عَنِ النَّعِيمِ. And on that day you should be asked about the bliss. And the Prophet ﷺ was telling Sayyidina Abu Bakr and Sayyidina Umar, this is amongst what you shall be asked about, dates and water. Meaning, have you been appreciative and grateful and thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it? That one does not take these blessings for granted. And from you'd say, the lower self tends to make what is routine as if it's not worthy the appreciation or the gratefulness. Right? So one would only be grateful if they have a fancy meal. But if they eat something that is staple, they're not as appreciative and as grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as they would be if it's something fancy, something that they really crave. He said, Imam Al-Ghazali, he said, it strengthens the base desires. In our tradition, some of the parents, some of the mothers, when the baby starts to cry, for food, they don't immediately give the food. They just delay it a bit. They won't die, it won't hurt, but they just delay it a bit, and they will sustain. They will endure the crying, but not immediately as the child wakes, okay, here's the food. No, just let the baby wait a bit, even if it's a few minutes. But to start the notion of that delayed gratification at that time. Why? Because the way we deal with food, the way we deal with other desires, especially the sexual desire as well. This is, and I'll give now and apologize for the guys, I will reveal something that is important. If someone proposes to a sister and you want to know this person's attitude in matters that are related to intimacy and so on and so forth, and well, based on how they deal with food. That's probably how they deal with their sexual desire. The guys are laughing, subhanAllah. Well, labbaik, only the single guys. SubhanAllah. Yeah. So for example, there's someone when he eats with etiquette. And this is someone probably has etiquette in other matters as well. There is someone when he eats in a fashion that is, lacks etiquette, or doesn't have enough of food, or not easily satisfied. It just models the individual's attitude towards craves in general. Towards craves in general. In today's world, for example, and let's be honest and speak about these matters in a way that is both maintains shyness, but also it has to be direct because these are serious issues. Right? You could say there is an epidemic amongst youth, whether Muslims or non-Muslims, related to porn addiction. Right? And one could say that it's prevalent amongst guys more than amongst men more than amongst women. Right? Which is now to many sisters, they cannot ask about this. Right? Some families, they ask now when somebody's proposing, do you have any addictions? Some of these addictions could go to serious levels. Right? Where the individual, because of that addiction, they are never satisfied by their wives. They're just not satisfied. Or they have unrealistic expectations. How does this relate to our topic today? Well, the way we deal, again, as I said, the way we deal with food, the way we deal with food as a crave, that sort of models how the individual deals with more serious, pertinent craves. With the food, your brain will be alarmed when your gut starts to feel the emptiness. Right? With other matters, especially if someone does not lower their gaze, things are just coming in front of them. How would the individual tame their lower self? Right? Well, you tame your lower self by the muscle of resilience, by willpower, obviously by the tawfiq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm just explaining the means of it. Right? You need a spiritual muscle, you need a muscle of willpower that you can say to the haram, no. Well, how do you develop willpower? You develop willpower over the craves. The first crave that you encounter as a human being is the food. So if you had already developed a willpower muscle in relation to the food, you would develop that in relation to other matters as well. But if one fails with the food, it becomes difficult with the other matters as well. Yeah? So it's a serious issue. Don't overlook, don't say, oh, it's just food and it's halal. It won't affect other matters. No, it does. It does have an effect. Right? It does have an effect. Otherwise, fasting would have been just intimacy, not the food and water. Right? And the Prophet ﷺ, when he mentioned the fasting, he highlighted, and this is why Imam Al-Ghazali mentioned here, he said, and fortifies the armies of the shaitan. Fullness fortifies. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned about fasting that it makes it difficult for the shaitan. where the Prophet ﷺ said that it creates this confinement, this narrowness for the shaitan to pass through. طيب. So now then Imam Al-Ghazali, he says satiety from lawful food is the beginning, look, is the beginning of all evil. He says, so what then of unlawful consumption? Seeking the lawful is an obligation upon every Muslim. That is known. And then he says, worship performed while consuming the unlawful is like building upon filth. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. So after he discussing what is lawful and the effects of indulging into what is lawful beyond what is needed, he speaks about what is haram, and he's here referring to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he describes the person who has been traveling, or it seems that he has been putting effort in worship, and then he raises his hand. The Prophet ﷺ يرفع يديه يقول يا رب يا رب, oh Allah, oh Allah, after having exerted so much effort in ibadah or in seeking the ibadah, and raises his hand saying Ya Rabb Ya Rabb. And then the Prophet ﷺ said وَمَطْعَمُهُ حَرَامٌ وَمَشْرَبُهُ حَرَامٌ وَغُذِيَ مِنْ حَرَامٍ فَأَنَّ يُسْتَجَابُ لِذَلِكَ. He ate from haram, and he drank from haram, and he was dressed from haram, and he was nurtured from haram. He said فَأَنَّ يُسْتَجَابُ لِذَلِكَ. The supplications of such would not be accepted. He says, Imam Al-Ghazali, he says, if you're content throughout the year with a coarse garment, and each day and night with 2 loaves of coarse bread, and abandon indulgence in the finest condiments, you will not lack what is sufficient for you from the lawful, for the lawful is abundant. You see, this is the level of Imam Al-Ghazali. The level of some of the pious predecessors. Not only, they avoided excessiveness, but they sought what would be swift and quick so that they don't spend so much time in food. So for example, some of them were known that they would not eat the loaf of bread as in like big chunks or pieces or an entire loaf, but rather, they would dry it out and crush it so it becomes, like breadcrumbs, right? That you would use to make like a fried chicken, and they would just eat it by the spoon. They say because that time we can save for ibadah or reading. Again, I'm not saying this that you go, back home, you start opening the cupboard, you get out the breadcrumbs that your mother, your wife uses for the, for the fried chicken, and you start like, I'm doing like the salaf. No, they would think that you lost your mind. We mention these things so that at least we can push ourselves just a little bit. Push ourselves to higher limits. Then Imam Al-Ghazali comes to speak about the notion of what is unlawful and determining what is unlawful. He says you're not required to ascertain the innermost details of every matter. Rather, you're obligated to avoid what you know to be unlawful. This is the basic level, the standard level. You don't have to go excessive in investigating. He says you're obligated to avoid what you know to be unlawful, or what you suspect to be unlawful, but he gave a qualifier. He said with suspicion grounded in clear, tangible signs. If it's clear, tangible signs that create a suspicion, then avoid that. But Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu was passing with some of the companions in one of the roads I can't remember if it was in Medina or another town, and a woman was pouring some water that was used in the house, and it splashed on their clothes. So one of the companion that was with Sayyidina Umar went to ask her, does that contain any filth? Right? So Sayyidina Umar, he told her, do not answer his question. Meaning, otherwise you start developing waswas. Right? Did you smell any filth? No. He said, don't ask her. Otherwise, you start being excessive with these matters. He says, as for that which is known with certainty to be unlawful, khalas, this is obvious. He said, or what you suspect to be unlawful is suspicion grounded in clear, tangible signs, especially concerning wealth. See this one. Especially concerning wealth. Now let me ask you this question. What would you think the most difficult nowadays, or the most difficult, or the most subtle, the most overlooked aspects related to consuming what is haram? What would that be, other than the chicken question? Money. In what sense? Riba? Huh?
How it's earned?
How it's earned, mashallah, yes. Whether the individual, because matters that are like riba, for example, are obvious. But has the individual actually earned what they earned in a way that they deserve it? Let me give you clarify this with a better example. Someone who goes to work and they make it seem like they're actually doing some effort. You find some people just walking around in the office, swiftly photocopying stuff, coming back and forth, sitting on the desk, and they're actually not doing anything. Right? But their attitude in the office makes you feel, it must be like, they have been doing like the job of like 3 other people. But in actuality, they're not doing anything. They look like doing something, but they're not. And then at the end of the week, at the end of the month, they earn a salary. A percentage of this salary could be halal. And this is something that has been highlighted especially by Habib Ali. That this is a dimension of haram earnings that people overlook. People think that haram earnings only in haram transactions, or stealing, taking money that is not yours. These are obvious matters. But what is often overlooked is an employee who does not exert all the effort in their job, and then at the end of the month, they take the salary and they deem it halal for them. Even if they know that if they were paid for 40 hours per week, they only worked for like 10. Actual working, not just like spending the time at work. Actual productivity, 10 hours. The remaining, chit-chatting. And Habib Ali, he warns against this notion of, they're not paying me enough. They're not paying me enough. So, since they're paying me peanuts, I'll give them efforts based on what they pay. Based on what they pay. They give me 100, and I feel that I should be given 500. So, since they only give me 100, I'll give them work of 100. And I'll make it seem like I've been doing all work. So Habib Ali says this is not a manner of a Muslim. Not that the person who does it is a disbeliever, he's not hinting to that, but he's saying that manners of Muslims, since you agreed to a contract, and since the individual on the other side, the other party in the contract, they offered you the job with this amount of salary, and they expect from you that you would carry out all of these duties for this X amount of money. If you don't like it, leave it. I can't leave it. Then you got to be patient. See, we're not debating your view that I deserve 500. Because we will assume that you deserve it. Because in some cases, one would assume, oh, I deserve 500, but they actually, 100 is too much. Sometimes people make false, evaluation of their skills. But let's assume it's a correct evaluation. Fine. How would you do this notion of istirzaq, seeking the provision of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Why you're deceiving His creation? Why would that be a means for a better job? So this is one of the most overlooked aspects related to haram. And please forgive me if I will, if I'll say it this bluntly. And then you might find that individual is getting into a fight and a disputation over the chicken issue. I'm not saying it's not important. If you're seeking what is halal, that is good. But this is like someone who's like from the people who, fought against Sayyidina al-Hussein alayhi salam in Karbala, but then at the same time they're asking about whether the blood of a mosquito is najis or not. Come on. Is this issue, is the blood of a mosquito, is it najis or not, is important, and you're giving it this great, focus. But in Karbala, you're fighting against Sayyidina Imam Hussein. Maybe this example is, obviously too much when you compare it to but I'm just letting you know that even the Salaf sometimes Imam Ahmed bin Hanbal would find some people becoming excessive in abstaining from what is doubtful. And he would see that the individual in front of him, they're abstaining of what is doubtful. It's in a way that is beyond their religiosity. It does not corroborate. Meaning, they're not as fearful with more obvious stuff. So he's like, don't deceive yourself. There was a man who came and asked Imam Ahmed bin Hanbal, he says, while we're writing the hadith, sometimes my ink, goes empty. So I just chuck in the feather in the ink of my neighbor in the class. Take some few drops to write the hadith. So Imam Ahmed bin Hanbal got enraged by that person. He said, what kind of question is that? Why do you doubt this? There's no problem in that. And there was another person where the Imam Ahmed, he said, no, be careful. Imam Ahmed was asked by two young women who used to weave using the light of the torches of the policemen that passed by, the security guards in the towns. So they would wait until they passed through the street, and they would sit on the top of the house waiting for this light to appear, and then they start to do knitting. Right? So they went and asked Imam Ahmed bin Hanbal, are we allowed to use this light? Because it's not theirs, and it was not made for that. Those two young women were the daughters of Imam Shafi'i. So Imam Ahmed bin Hanbal, he said, if it were someone else, I would have said it's halal. But since you are the daughters of the Shafi'i, no, you cannot do this. So why? I'm just trying to show you that the Imam, the great Imams, they realize that treating doubtful matters has to be in conformity with, so long as it's something that is beyond what is clear, tangible science, just a higher level, just being excessively cautious. He says this excessive cautiousness from what is doubtful should corroborate with an excessive cautiousness from what is haram. But if one has excessive cautiousness from what is doubtful, and they have no cautiousness from what is haram, then don't deceive yourself. Take that energy, channel it towards what is haram. Because that's the priority now. Yeah. He says, as for what is suspected based on evident signs, it is, for example, wealth acquired by rulers and their officials, or wealth of those whose sole livelihood comes from lamentations. This was a job back in the day. Lamentations, niyaha, is like they used to hire, let's say, a woman that would come after a person's death, that would come to the funeral or come to the household where the person died, and she would just starts like weeping, but in acting, right? So she start weeping and screaming and so on and so forth. In some parts of the world, they still do it. Someone comes just to scream and weep and cry out. So Imam Al-Ghazali is giving an example of livelihoods that are haram. The money that is earned from a task that is unlawful. He said the sale of wine, usury, musical instruments, and other forbidden forms of entertainment. Note a word here. He said whose sole livelihood. Because there will come a question, what if the person's earnings is partially halal and partially haram? Like some of the companies many Muslims work for today, some of their transactions are haram, some of their transactions are halal, some of their dealings are haram, some of their dealings are halal. And the individual's job in and of itself is halal. Let's say someone works as a customer support, for example, and it's a tech company. So the nature of the business is halal. His nature of job is also halal. But maybe this tech company has some dealings that involves usury or any kind of haram transaction. When they receive their salary, they intend that they're receiving it from the halal portion. That's what they can do. Otherwise, no one would work for any business today. Right? So they just intend that they're taking from what is halal. Imam Al-Ghazali here is speaking about something that is in its entirety, like the nature of the industry itself, in and of itself, is haram. Not a corporation that works in a halal industry, it's just that some of its dealings that are haram. He says, if you know that the majority of a person's wealth is certainly unlawful, then whatever you take from his hand, even if it could rarely be lawful, is considered unlawful, because that is what predominates based on strong presumption. But to reach that level, it most likely would have to be someone who works solely in a livelihood that is completely haram. He says purely unlawful wealth also includes consuming from religious endowments, awqaf, contrary to the conditions set by the benefactor, the waqif. That's why you would find in fiqh textbooks, they have these definitions. Who is a faqih? Like who's a scholar of fiqh? So that if they receive this sponsorship, this support, they are actually worthy of it. So back in the day, they would establish institutions like schools, and these schools were established through endowments. For example, someone would come and say, I have this wealth, and I want to establish a waqf of a school that teaches Maliki fiqh. So if someone is not a Maliki, they're not allowed to teach in that school. Why? Because the school, the money that they earn it based on what? That they're being Maliki. And then they would define, well, what would make a person Maliki? Is there the mere fact that they say that they are such, or is there a knowledge threshold that they have to pass in order to be called, given that appellation, Maliki, Hanafi, Hanbali, Shafi'i? Right? In other words, they look into the eligibility of that individual to receive from that endowment. Okay, you might say this is not necessarily applicable today, and if it is, not to many people. What would be applicable today? Someone, for example, applying for a scholarship and they're forging their scholarship application, making it seem that they're eligible for that scholarship, meanwhile they're not. He says, someone who applies for a religious institution that is traditionally Sunni, right? Meanwhile they're Wahhabis. You're not allowed. Why? Because the person who established this endowment, he said, the salaries that are paid for people who are traditionally Sunnis. Follow the traditional theological schools, one of the four madhahib, they follow the spiritual path in that sense. And vice versa. Someone who established a school and said this school is for Deobandis. If you Barelvi, don't apply. And so on. Whoever made a condition for a particular job or for a particular earning, and this salary is paid from a fund that has been established and designated by the benefactor of this fund. He said, I give this fund for the individuals who meet the following conditions. Then if the individual forges, fakes the conditions, that's haram money. Apologize about the examples, but and whoever commits a sin that invalidates their testimony, what they take under the pretense of Sufi affiliation, whether from endowments or otherwise, is unlawful. Now, invalidating testimony can be if they commit a sin that would deem their testimony invalid. Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal, for example, considers the one who does not pray witr, their testimony is invalid. See? So back in the day, they had these, what is known as khanqa. Khanqa was basically like, you could say a form of an institution. It's a space of worship, and they would have designated rooms for the spiritual retreat of khalwa, and so on and so forth. It's like a madrasa, but for the Sufis in a sense. And most of the time that is spent is in dhikr and ibadah, more than teaching classes and reading books. And they would have these, let's say, someone who has an endowment in the sense that they provide food for whoever spends time there, or whoever seeks the spiritual path. Then they're only worthy of that food if they meet that condition, and so on. Then he said, we have detailed the pathways leading to doubtful matters and the distinctions between lawful and unlawful in a dedicated book, like a chapter from Ihya Ulumuddin. And then he said, you must seek it out, for knowing the lawful and striving for it is an obligation upon every Muslim. Just like the 5 daily prayers, to that extent. Maybe may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala facilitate that we read this chapter from the Ihya, inshallah, at some point here, bi'idhnillah. Then he said, as for the private parts, guard them from everything that Allah Most High has prohibited. Be as Allah has described, and those who guard their private parts except with their wives or those whom their right hands possess, for them they are not blameworthy. Then he said, you will not achieve protection of the private parts except by first guarding the eyes from looking, the heart from contemplating, and the stomach from doubtful or excessive consumption. See, what I was mentioning earlier. That that one leads to this one. He says, for these are the stirrers and seeds of lust, wal-'iyadhu billah. He said, first, guarding the eyes from looking. And perhaps out of these three, Imam Al-Ghazali mentioned the eyes first, because that is this is the gateway to the heart. Meaning the heart contemplates based on what the eyes see. That recollection of what has been seen, that remembering what has been seen, being creative with what has been seen. And when it says in the stomach from doubtful or excessive consumption, this becomes what we call in Arabic illa madiyya. So if one would look at that sin as we would look at a chair for it to be a chair, it needs wood, right? Otherwise, how would you create a chair without wood? I mean, someone may say plastic, but just a wooden chair, right? And you need wood. That's the material from which that chair would be created. So that excessive consumption is like the material from which that lust is acted upon. Because if the individual has been, applying fasting in a very religious, punctual way, it could, at least to some extent, decrease that lust. He said, first, guarding the eyes from looking. And one would not realize, inshallah, and I think we'll conclude with this topic, but this is very important. One might not realize that what we're facing today around the world, what you see in terms of the sexual revolution, for example, it started with matters related to gazing. The beginning of the entire sexual revolution, one of the very first things that they promoted was a magazine. The first product of the sexual revolution is a magazine, Playboy magazine. That was the beginning of it. And that movement in the US, when it wanted to promote that, because it was not allowed, so they had to file court cases so that the American court system would allow the selling of such products. This is just last century. And those folks would, address the Muslims who maintain a modest lifestyle as backward thinking, making you think that their culture has been like this from the beginning of creation, which is not. Just something happened towards the end of the first half of last century. And when they tried to justify this in the court system, they said married men need it. And this would help them with their spouses. That was one of the justifications that they actually made. At some point in my work with the Taba Foundation, I did a philosophical critique of a book written by, and Google what I say, and there's nothing obscene when you Google this. There is someone who actually coined that term, the sexual revolution. This guy was named Wilhelm Reich. And Wilhelm Reich was he's considered one of the founding fathers of the sexual revolution. All the LGBTQ, all of what you're witnessing today, he is one of the key individuals in the theorization of it. And he wrote a book titled The Sexual Revolution. It was published in the 30s, roughly. And he belonged to a school called the Frankfurt School. And this Frankfurt School was basically people coming from two backgrounds. Coming from a Freudonian psychology, right, psychoanalysis, and the school of Freud in psychology, and the school of Karl Marx in economics. So these were the two coming together into one place, the infusion of both ideas. Karl Marx believed that there is nothing beyond the material. The world is only materialistic, nothing beyond it. Right? Freud believed that the primary motive for mankind in any decision is the sexual one. And I believe, if I recall correctly, his sister, a relative of his, she's the one who's the founder of modern day advertisement. This is why you would see an advertisement for a toothpaste and they make it something that is sexual. A deodorant, something that's sexual. Because it comes from that underpinning. People make decisions based on these impulses. So let's use women as commodities to sell products. So Wilhelm Reich wrote this book, The Sexual Revolution, in which he was promoting that people should repel the notion of family. And they should consider marriage as just an open, long-lasting relationship. And that husbands should not be limited to the wives, nor vice versa. And one of the things that he justified this in his book, he said, to believe that the private parts, the sexual organs, the reproductive system basically, is for procreation. This is to assume that there has been a metaphysical cause for this biology that dictated that these were created for a particular aim, goal. And in his view, these things exist in a human being because they just do. And all that we need to do as human beings, just have this energy flow back and forth. That's all. It's not about babies, it's not about children, it's not about family. Family is not sacred. Family, this is something that has been imposed. Karl Marx believed that the church makes people obedient to tyrants, political tyrants. So the idea here was, well, what the church does not come to the people. People come to the church. Who would go to the church? Families. They take their kids, they go to the church. So if we break down the family, then we don't need to criticize or go against the church anymore. It becomes obsolete because there's no family altogether. Now look at the Western world. How do families look like in the Western world? How does the relationship between children and parents, even if they know their parents? So Wilhelm Reich, when he authored this book, there's part of the story I did not tell you, which is that his mother used to have an affair while she was married to his father. And he knew. Not the father, Wilhelm Reich, when he was a young boy. And he started to tell his mother that I'm going to tell my father. He eventually, if I recall correctly, he told his father or something of that sort, or that he threatened her, and she eventually committed suicide. So he lived with that burden. I am the reason why my mom committed suicide. This is an analysis from me. I was the reason why she committed suicide. So he dedicated his life for many insane things. He used to have this kiosk, metal kiosk, that he would enter and have to close the door and would remain in that metal kiosk for a long period. And he says it revitalizes the energy of the body. He had a lot of stuff like that. But he decided, since my mother had an affair and I was the reason why she committed suicide, then let's have all women have affairs. And he justifies making it seem philosophical in his book, The Sexual Revolution, this whole thing. I usually, by the way, some of this information, and I share it with high school students in international schools in Egypt and elsewhere, when they have questions about LGBTQ and so on and so forth. Right? Many young folks now, they don't understand the origins of it. Right? What you see in Netflix is the snowball of what someone like Wilhelm Reich and 2, 3 others kick-started that direction from the 30s of last century. And then the culmination is what you see on Netflix today. Is what you see today. So initially, their first product, and I apologize if I took too long with this, their first product was something that was a magazine, pictures for people to gaze at. And then you take the line, you stretch it, and you see the craziness in today's world. How is this relevant to individuals? You might think that gazing at someone or someone's or a movie or a clip is something that will stop there. Well, originally it was a magazine that was printed, and people had to go and show an ID that they to buy this magazine and so on and so forth. Now it's an industry, multi-billion industry. Websites where someone just putting a keyword and everything just comes in front of them. So if this is happening at a large scale, but it also happens individually as well, where it begins by a clip, and then the individual all of a sudden, months, year later, finds themselves addicted to it. And I've been in my discussions with teenagers in high school, Muslim teenagers, right? When I speak to them about the gravity of the porn addiction, right? One of the things that many youth do not realize, which is an aspect they don't know, they don't see it. You might think, the notion of this is haram, maybe it's not as vibrant in some of the hearts of the teenagers. They're young and want to try things, and Sheikh, what can I do? I cannot get married, and things of that sort, which does not justify, but I'm just saying. Then I tell them, sometimes you might have a potential that you don't know for developing homosexuality. And you don't know it. It's there, but you don't know it. And only when you go to that porn addiction where it becomes actualized. So if you want to try. And sometimes this scares some of the teenagers off from doing that more than saying this is haram. They're like, no, I want to remain straight. I will not watch. So, what I'm trying to say here, gazing has a profound, strong effect on the individual to an extent that the individual may not realize that effect of it. Allah. طيب, let's look at the slide on it, and I believe this is enough, inshallah. Sounds like someone I know. MashaAllah. Should we as Muslims try to also eat food that is tayyib? As food nowadays can be technically halal, yet raised in harmful and unsustainable ways. 100%. Thank you for this question. This is very, very important. And I know a Muslim couple in Egypt, a brother from South Africa, Brother Yasin Muhammad, whose father is Brother Nabil. His father is Professor Yasin Muhammad from South Africa, who's one of the most notable Muslim philosophers is specialized in virtue ethics. So his son and Brother Nabil's wife, they established a project in Egypt about this notion of tayyib. Right? So yes, 100%. And unfortunately, Muslim shuyukh have been so vocal about tobacco, but they're not as vocal as it needs to be when it comes to fast food, when it comes to unhealthy food, unhealthy fizzy drinks, and so on and so forth. Right? Even though some of these things have terrible effects on the body, equal to the tobacco, if not in some cases worse than that. Can we do a workshop on riba in modern times and what is included or excluded? Allahu Akbar. We could try, inshallah. We will have these weekly classes in which you will get to vote on the topic, so we can do that, inshallah. If on a contract for X hours, but their manager doesn't have enough work for them to equal X hours, does that mean their predetermined salary based on X hours is haram? No. That becomes their, the company's responsibility, right? But so long as you're doing your utmost to to achieve the tasks or to fulfill the tasks that you have been tasked with, then there shouldn't be a problem, inshallah. I don't see a problem. What should one do with money earned from not working full contracted hours? How to calculate the non-worked hours from the past? Allahu Akbar. I don't know. What is the extent one should go for investigating halal or haram food? It's just the question is too broad because food is of different kinds. Labbaik. Don't delete the. Oh. What about meat? Oh, it's a tough one. That's like a whole lecture on its own. Look, it's either that the individual saw the slaughtering of the animal themselves. I mean, either they've done it or they've seen it, right? Witnessed it firsthand. If this is not the case, what would be the other case? It's narrations, right? You've been told that this has been slaughtered. It has been said to you that this has been slaughtered, right? So choose the authentic narrations. That's all I can say. Right? The narration that deems authentic, that deems liable, to the best of your ability. Otherwise, it might be too difficult. Obviously, if the individual, has a suspicion towards a halal board, the board that certifies, and they wish to abstain from that, no one can blame them. Right? they see that this is a suspicious body, they don't know it, whatever it may be. I would not necessarily say that this is excessive, right? But at the same time, if someone says, I make sure that whatever I eat has been certified by a halal board of certification, and that is, as a Muslim, that is my ability, and I just don't have the knowledge or even the energy or the time to research all these things, and then I reach dead ends, and it will just go on forever. So what I will do is that I will take the face value Muslims whom I do not know that they have, that they're doing haram things, or that they are, their conduct is deceiving of any sort. They're Muslims. In the face value, they're Muslims. In the face value, they say that we're doing this for the sake of Islam and Muslims and so on and so forth. And they have said, we have this board and we established that this food is halal. Khalas. This is what the layman is able to verify. Someone else who's more skilled, more knowledgeable, knows more, whatever it may be, or knows this particular body, or knows that this particular body certifies practices that are, that are shady, then it becomes incumbent upon them to abstain from that. Why? Because they themselves have reasonable doubts to abstain from it. Right? And sometimes they might not be able to even communicate those doubts. There's just something in their heart. Khalas, if it's something in your heart and you're able to abstain from it, then abstain. No one would blame you. No one would say, oh, this is excessive. Why? Because it's suspicions that are, that are level of strong suspicions, let's say. Yeah, I think this is what the time would allow. Allahu Alam. How to balance staying hungry but eating to stay strong for worship. Allahu Akbar. Well, but two things. When you say how to balance staying hungry but eating to stay strong, the issue is not to be in a state of like a perpetual state of hunger, right? It just, one would eat until just before they become full. Not that they would eat and then they leave the table actually hungry, or not receiving enough nutrition. So I hope that I was not, that I apologize if I did not clarify that. But there's notions that are related to quantity, and there are notions that are related to quality, and some foods are just in nature are heavy. So you might eat less of it. The quantity might be less, but the effect of it, that it creates heaviness. So just make sure that what you eat is something that it keeps you light for worship. And if it's something that is heavy, then don't eat too much of it. This is what I can say right now. And maybe we can do like a workshop on this issue as well, where we can give examples and so on. In workplace, they have 10 paid sick days a year. Allah. If you take a paid sick day whilst not being sick, and you don't go work, would this be considered haram income? I'm sorry?
I said yes.
Oh.
It's a mental health thing.
I don't know. The reason I don't know, because there are things, for example, that would be mentioned in contracts, not because the owner of the company necessarily requires it, but it's something that is mandated by the government, for example, right? So the government says you have to put in the 10 sick days. And then also sometimes there are these qualifiers, caveats that are sometimes known culturally, and it's understood from both parties. But look, this is what I would say. If the individual needs to take that sick day while they're not sick, right? If they are dedicated, hard workers, I would assume, and they have a good rapport with their manager, and there's a legitimate reason, right, to take that day off, like they have to do something with their children, or maybe a spouse is sick, and they need to cover, the role of that spouse at home of some sort, for example, right? I would assume that if they speak with their manager, they say, look, I really need to take that day off, and the days that I have available that I can take off is the sick days. I'm not sick, but I really need to take that day off, for example, right? They might say, yes, take it.
A lot of companies do understand that.
Yeah.
If you speak to them, they'll say, all right, instead of putting your normal leave, just take it as a sick leave.
Correct. So doing that would be better than, don't say, I have X, Y, and Z, and you don't. Yeah. So what I would suggest is that you do something like this. If you really need to take the day, and I think they would appreciate the honesty. I only ask this question because sometimes you need a mental break. Then each one would know their condition better. Maybe look, I can understand this in some jobs, for example, where, let's say, someone who works as a nurse at a department in a hospital where, they see a lot of things on daily basis that can come to a point where it becomes heavy on the soul. Understandable, right? Someone who works as a customer support, they answer phone calls of disgruntled customers every single day where people just shout at them for things that it's not their responsibility. And at a day where there's maybe some trouble at home or with a family member or with a friend or something like that, and you just cannot handle it, so they take a sick day. That is understandable, right? But someone wants to take a sick day to go to the Gold Coast, that's not understandable. Unless you really need the Gold Coast for that mental recharge. How should one approach the meals of the day, as nowadays there are supplementary meals such as breakfast, morning, and afternoon tea? Is that a meal?
Depends.
Like a tea is a meal? What do you mean? I mean, tea is tea. Right?
It's like, I didn't ask this question. In the UK, we have like a tea time, which is like...
It's a tea ceremony.
Between lunch and dinner, where it's like you get like a little sandwich or like tea and biscuits, like that's how it is in the UK at least. That's how it is.
Look, these sort of questions, it will vary from one person to another. It will vary based on a number of things, based on what these meals include, their nutrition, their own history with food. So it becomes difficult just to answer this in a Q&A. So I cannot answer this. Alhamdulillah. Jazakumullah khair. I apologize if you guys stayed for too long. See you tomorrow, inshallah, the final class.